Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're about to go ahead and jump into our next session in a couple of moments. So if you could, go ahead and get out the following materials. First, you're going to need the daily lesson outcome you drafted as part of your pre-work. Second, you're going to need to grab any handouts for the session. So they're probably on the back table or your CMAs are getting those to you. And then last but not least, you're probably going to want either your notebook or a computer, something for you to take some notes on. Also, if you prefer soft copies, the handouts are also already on the Social Studies team website. And I know that this is a video and I sometimes have the bad habit of speaking very quickly. So if you need to watch the video again, that can also be found on our Social Studies team website. So let's take maybe about 30 or so seconds to get everything we need, and then we'll dive right in. Okay, awesome. Today's session is titled Daily Lesson Outcome Setting. I'm definitely very excited about this session, but before we jump right in, I should probably introduce myself a bit. So I'm Andre Houghton, and this summer I have the pleasure of working as the Social Studies Content Dean. So I'll be delivering a lot of your whole group Social Studies sessions here at Black, and then I'm also functioning as the Curriculum Specialist at Black. So if you're a Black core member, or a core member at Black rather, you'll be seeing a lot of me. But as far as why I'm not here, so I do apologize for not being able to be with you at Institute this week. There's literally only one thing that would cause me not to be here this week, and that's my kids. I think the kids, that's literally why we're in this work. And so my campus, we still have school for a week or so, and we're actually with our 8th graders up in DC. Matter of fact, you might actually be able to hear them during the course of this video, because I'm actually taping this while they're in the room next door playing video games. I have no idea how they have any energy, because we literally walk like 10 miles today checking out a bunch of the museums and monuments. But before we jump in, I wanted to actually show you some pictures of my kids. This summer you will see lots of pictures of them. All right. Okay, so over here on the left, this is Miguel. Miguel is one of my more difficult students. This is the first time he's actually made it to an end of year field trip since 5th grade. So for him to get on this trip, that was like a win for both of us. Here in the middle, you see some of my top girls right here. Very impressed with them. And then over here on the right is one of my high flyers. This is Noah. He might be the most curious kid I've ever met. And so one of the reasons I wanted to show you guys these pictures is I just think for me, like, this is why this session is so important. The reason that I'm still teaching, the reason that I decided to work for Teach for America this summer and work with you all, is that, like, I have a passion for creating educators that can give my students what they need, right? Like, I won't necessarily always be here, but like one of you will be taking these kids on a trip next year, and I want to give you every single tool you need to be the best teacher you can be for them. So I hope you'll definitely dive into this session as well as all the other sessions this summer. I'm excited. Okay, so let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about myself. So this is me here on the left with my beautiful daughter, Sammy. She's sort of the other reason I'm still teaching and I'm working with you guys this summer. Now when I think about the teacher I want for Sammy, I want somebody who cares, who knows what they're doing, and is committed to this work. And so for me, it's even more important now, right? Like, I'm not just hoping to help you become great teachers for my students, but I'm like, hoping you'll become great teachers for my daughter as well. I graduated from the University of Florida. Go Gators. And I know if you're a core member at Black Middle School, you met Brian earlier. He's another Florida Gator, somebody who inspires me daily. My family is from Jamaica. This is a picture outside one of the resorts. Beautiful place. I don't get to go back often enough. Hopefully this summer. And then this picture down here is actually me at Institute in 2010, right? So it wasn't actually that long ago. I sat in the same seats you're sitting in, and was probably super nervous and a little bit overwhelmed. But I'm still here. I'm still making it. I'm still making an impact. So I know you guys will do awesome as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Oh, I guess there's one thing I probably forgot to mention. I want you guys to all have my contact information. So here's my phone number, email address, and here's my classroom website if you wanted to check it out as well. And all this information can be found on our social studies website. So if you don't get a chance to copy it down now, no problem. Since this is our first session together and we will be working together more this summer, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about session norms. And so just a couple of quick things for me. I'm all about being present, right? Like, we've got a lot of work to do this summer, but when we're here, we really want to be here. Use your technology wisely, be purposeful with discussions, and like, I'm going to really try to make sure that every single session you have a dedicated work time to really apply some of these principles, but I want us to make sure we're using that time effectively. I also want us to be curious, right? Like, just seek to improve your practice. If it's anything that I want you guys to get out of this session, is this idea that, like, as a teacher, you're always growing and developing. Ask those clarifying questions. Come with an open mind. And then last but certainly not least, go ahead and make the session work for you. Look for what you can take from the session. If you need to get up, get a drink of water, anything that you need to inspire yourself, do so. And I guess the last thing I would say, this is a video session. It's not how I would like to deliver most of my sessions, but it is what it is. We gotta get it done. And so because of that, it's not gonna be as interactive as I would like, right? I'm not going to be calling on you guys to read. There won't be as many discussions as we typically have. But what I'm going to try and do is push the session a little bit faster. And so instead of you guys getting like 40 minutes of work time, I really want us to actually get like 60 minutes of work time. So if I go too fast in the session, remember, you have the video. You can watch and rewatch anything you need to do. But this won't necessarily be like a typical session. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right in. What I want you guys to do is, at your tables, I want you to spend a few moments and I want you to go ahead and share that lesson outcome that you created for pre-work, right? And as you're sharing those lesson outcomes, I have two questions that I want you to be discussing primarily, right? What parts of that process came easily to you? So when you were making that outcome, what was like, I got this? And then second question, where did you struggle in creating that lesson outcome? So go ahead and take about 2 to 3 minutes at your tables, and let's go ahead and start the timer. Whoa, that was actually more difficult than I thought. Normally during like table discussions and stuff, I'm running around the room like a crazy person, like standing by tables trying to get an idea of what you guys are talking about. And one of my favorite parts of the table discussions is just like bringing everybody back together and hearing what people are saying. But for the purposes of this lesson, we won't do that. But I would love to hear about your first outcomes that you made during pre-work when I get back. But that being said, let's go ahead and push forward. Okay, so now let's dive into today's mission. We have a mindset mission today. And our mindset today is, at the end of the session, I want you to understand that daily lesson outcome setting is an essential first step of the planning process. But I also want you to have a skill in mind, right? Like at the end of this hour and a half, I want you to be able to take an objective and draft and align lesson outcome that you will actually teach next week, right? So this mindset, this belief, but also the skill behind it to get it done. Okay. Here's a picture of some of my other munchkins, right? Like when I think about why this session matters to you, it's because if you can set a strong daily lesson outcome for what they're gonna learn, then you know for a fact they're gonna do well in that class, right? Like when I look at these kids and they're here on Saturday at Saturday tutorials, I know that whatever strong foundations I set as far as the lesson plan and process is only going to benefit them in the future, right? So this is why you need to be focused in this session. Keep that in mind. And these are some of the kids like you will have this summer, right? Like these are my kids, they're your kids too. Okay, so I know you guys spent some time yesterday as well as this morning looking at the towel wheel, and today's session is primarily going to focus on this academic piece. Okay, so where we're going today, we're going to look at what outcome setting is. I'm actually going to walk you through a think aloud, and then I'm going to give you another example. So right, you'll get two big examples of lesson outcomes, and then the remainder of the time is you drafting that strong lesson outcome, which I think is perfect. So a lot of work time in this session, guys. Okay, so now let's jump into what daily lesson outcome, the process is, right? And so when we think about what we're teaching, we're typically going to get an objective, right? So something that kids need to know and understand. From that, we need to boil it down into the key points, right? Like what are those facts and skills, the knowledge and skills rather, that they need to master the objective. We also want to have that lesson assessment, right? What is the thing that kids are going to do to show us that they got it? And then last but not least, what does a good example of that look like, right? Like if I want to know if kids got it, I want to have a really good benchmark of what getting it looks like so I can measure them by that, right? Then it's like, okay, yes, I taught this objective, they mastered it, okay? Now, if you're like Homer, you're probably like, oh my gosh, what is this? This seems like a lot. And it can be, right? Lesson planning can be one of the trickier aspects of teaching. But we do have some strategies to make it far more straightforward for you, okay? And so these are just some of the things that we're going to be looking at in this session, okay? And so the question we're going to answer is, how do I get here? Okay, so I prepared a handout for you. It's actually handout 1. And so this is a note-taking template. Feel free to use it, jot down anything you need or not. It's totally fine. But it does sort of walk you through the process of the daily lesson outcome setting. Okay, and so the first thing we want to do is understand the objective. One of the best ways to do this is to take a look at the resources that exist about the topic. Okay. You also want to go ahead and establish the level of rigor. What is it that kids are being asked to do with this objective? Do they just need to identify something? Do they need to compare and contrast something? Do they need to analyze something? Like, what is the objective actually asking them to do? Different objectives have different levels of rigor, right? And that can tell you how deep to go into a topic. Then you want to actually go ahead and create the assessment for the kids, right? You want to go ahead and make that test for them, or that exit ticket, or this project, something that they're going to do to show you that they got it, okay? you also want to write that perfect response, right? Like in a perfect world, what would a student say so that you know they got it? And then last but not least, from those materials, you want to start coming up with those key points. What are the things that kids have got to know and be able to do in order to master the assessment? Okay, so these are the 4 steps of the lesson outcome setting process. And we're going to go through these steps in a little bit more details momentarily. Okay, now, to illustrate this a little bit better, I wanted to give you guys a think aloud. Now, a think aloud is an excellent strategy. You should definitely write it down, steal it, use it in your classrooms like literally next week, right? So I wanted to walk you guys through a think aloud. Now, let's say I get an objective and I need to set the outcome for it. Okay, and I'm gonna do this with a non-academic objective to kind of clear it up for you. Okay, so let's say the objective that I need to teach you all is students will be able to describe and create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, now I get this objective, and the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and understand the objective. Okay, and so I look at the level of rigor here. It says that students need to A, describe, right? So they need to tell me what's in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And B, they need to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? So this seems like a pretty detailed level of rigor, okay? I consult my different resources, and from my research, I realize that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I'm gonna need several ingredients, right? I'm gonna need bread, I'm gonna need peanut butter, I'm gonna need jelly, I'm gonna need a fork. What am I talking about, guys? It's late at night. I'm obviously going to need a knife for this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, okay? So I've now identified the objective, okay? I understood the objective. Now it's time for me to go ahead and draft the outcome. Now, when I think back to the objective, it says that students need to create and describe a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So for me, the assessment is clear. My test for them is to have them describe a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then make one for me. Okay, that will be their lesson assessment. Now that I've got the outcome, all right, I've got the lesson assessment, I need to make my student exemplar response. So I need to go ahead and make the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If I don't make the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich, how will I be able to measure if the kids got it or not, right? Essentially, I'm going to use my perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich as the metric to see whether or not they mastered the objective, okay? Okay, so I made my perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, I want to do the backwards planning. What do I need to tell kids in order for them to make the sandwich I made? So now I take a look at my sandwich. Oh, okay, let me walk through the steps. This is how you create your key points. Key point number 1, gather all materials. Peanut butter, jelly, bread, knife, paper plate. Step 2, take the bread, spread the jelly onto one slice of bread. Step 3, spread the peanut butter on the other slice of bread. Step 4, put the sandwich together. Step 5, enjoy your sandwich. So now I've got my key points, but I got one last thing to do. I need to use the key points to check my answer. I go ahead and make another sandwich, but this time I make that sandwich only following the key points. If just by doing my key points I can get a sandwich that is as good as that perfect exemplar, then I know my kids can do it, okay? This is how you draft a daily lesson outcome. You plan backwards, going from the objective and understanding it, to creating the assessment, to creating the exemplar response to the assessment, to drafting the key points, and then using those key points to answer the assessment. If you can answer the assessment using the key points, then you've got some strong key points, okay? Now, this was a sort of semi-ridiculous example of how you draft a daily lesson outcome, okay? Now I want to go ahead and walk you through that same process, actually using a real American history objective. So let's go ahead and take a look at this second example, and let's look at our objective. It says, students will be able to explain the origin of and then compare and contrast the first two political parties. Step one, I need to go ahead and understand my objective. Okay, so I want to know, what are the nouns and verbs? It says they've got to explain, right? And then they've got to compare and contrast. I want to know, what is it? What information should my students know? What should my students be able to do? Okay. I need to take a look at relevant resources. What are other exams out there that test my kids on this topic? What do they look like? What are the curriculum materials? Ooh, what would be awesome? Let me see some samples of student work on this topic. Now, if you go ahead and jump to handout 2, this one's a couple pages. I wanted to give you guys some examples of what some of those curriculum resources might look like, right? So on page 1 of that handout, I've got some standards, right? Knowing the standards or the objectives or the TEKS here in Texas for your topic is helpful. Page 2, I've got a sample exam. Knowing what types of questions will be asked pertaining to the objective can help you determine how much detail you need to put into it. Page 3 of this handout gives you some curriculum information that I've gathered from different districts here in Texas about our topic, right? So knowing what districts want you to teach or just giving you some information can be very helpful, especially if you're new to your content. Page 4, I've got a primary source that I pulled up from the internet about different topics, right? So don't shy away from using the internet and coming up with your resources, okay? And then, yeah, we can go ahead and move on from that, right? So step 1, let's go ahead and understand our objective. Okay, and of course, your ISAT, which I know you went through with your CMAs earlier this morning, can definitely give you more information about this as well. Okay, so continuing on with step 1, I wanted to go ahead and take a look at the way in which this particular objective is tested on the State of Texas exam, right? So taking a look at these two example questions, I realized that this particular topic is actually not really tested at such a high degree on the state test. What this tells me is I don't necessarily need to go super deep when I'm looking at this objective, but that might be a benchmark that I hit just knowing my kids, right? And so it's just like, okay, these are the types of questions I should be asking my kids, or at least these questions are the bare minimum for what I should be asking my kids, right? And so I know that the assessment I make for my kids has got to be at least this rigorous, okay? I also might want to spend some time looking at different district curriculum documents. They often provide like a lot of insight, okay? So now I want you to go ahead and spend the next 3 minutes. Go ahead and debrief this with the people at your table. I want you to go ahead and spend the next 3 minutes. Go ahead and dive into these 3 questions. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and push forward again. Okay. So we've established our level of rigor. We've looked at the relevant resources. Okay. Now it's time for us to go ahead and write the lesson assessment. Here, you want to go ahead and do a couple things. First, you want to model your assessment after the assessments your students will need to take towards the end of the unit or the end of the year, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you want it to be similar, okay? And the reason for this is you want to make sure that at the end of every lesson, you can clearly tell whether or not students have mastered the lesson you taught. Okay, so some examples of your assessment could include exit tickets, quizzes. You might just ask students questions and hear their oral responses. It could be like drafts of work that they're working on, or practice tasks, checklists, right? I've even seen people give their assessments on Post-it notes, right? And students had to just write a quick response to something, and that was their proof whether or not they got it. Okay. But I did have a couple of quick tricks that can make sure you make your assessments rigorous and reliable. So one thing for sure, you want to make sure they're mirrored, right? Make sure they're similar to assessments kids are going to have to take. You want to make sure they're scaffolded, right? So like the questions build upon themselves to a higher level of rigor. And then last but not least, you want to make sure like you're actually asking students about the objective. You want to make sure it's aligned. That being said, go ahead and take the next 3 minutes at your tables, and I want you to break apart my lesson assessment, right? So think back to the objective that we had, which was explain the origin of and then compare and contrast the first two political parties. This is my lesson assessment. I want you to go ahead and figure out what's good about this, what's not so good, and what would you do to improve it. So let's take another 3 minutes here. Okay, so probably what you guys were able to come up with this is that this particular assessment is not in the form of the test that students are going to have to take, which is a multiple choice test. In addition to that, it could be a little bit more rigorous. Maybe it could be a little bit easier, or at least the questions could maybe build on themselves just a little bit better. And so maybe here I should have started easier with some multiple choice, maybe then the fill in the blank, and then followed by that short response question. So these are just some things that we should be thinking about as we move forward. Okay. Awesome. And just, I think like the final piece is just, this is not necessarily just an answer key, right? Think about the steps that you're taking to solve the problem, because that's going to essentially form your key points. Okay. Okay. And so now that I've got my assessment, I need to come up with that perfect student response. And so here's the exemplar that I came up with, right? Like if a kid could get close to this, then I know for sure that they mastered the objective. Okay. Now I want to take that exemplar response and plan backwards to come up with the key points, right? What is it that my kids need to know in order to write this response? Okay. A couple of quick things here. Nouns and verbs, what do they need to know? The how, what are the steps they need to take? The why, like why does this objective actually matter in the grand scheme of things? How does it connect to like what we're trying to do in the class, whole, big picture wide? And then like last but not least, be concise. If you're giving kids 10 key points, they're not going to remember them, right? A good rule of thumb here is 3 to 5. 3 if those key points are really tricky. Okay. Once again, think about what you did to make your exemplar, because that's the information that kids need to take the assessment. Okay. And so these were some of the key points I came up with. As you can see, I'm a little bit more long-winded. I've got 6. So I've got my key points broken down. I got 4 what key points. Those are like facts, right? I've got the how, right? And then I've also got the why. Like, why does this matter to kids? So I'll give you guys a minute or so to take a look at these key points. Awesome. Okay. Now you want to take those key points and see if just using that information you could answer your assessment. Okay. If not, you need to adjust those key points so they can help you answer the assessment question. Okay. Now we're going to jump into the most important part of the session. We're going to jump to our work time. And so for this one, you actually have 2 options. Option number 1, if you feel like you're ready, I want you to go it alone, jump to your ISAT, pull out that objective calendar, and grab the objective of Tuesday. Okay? Do not look at the actual lesson plan, just grab Tuesday's objective, and I want you to go ahead and draft the lesson vision using handout 3. Okay, and I don't mean lesson vision here. I need to go ahead and change this. I want you to go ahead and draft the lesson outcome. Okay, draft the lesson outcome. Okay. Option number 2, you're actually going to partner up or maybe even make a group. You're going to go to the objective calendar and you're going to pick, once again, you're going to grab Tuesday's objective and you're going to draft that lesson outcome. But for this one, you're actually going to go ahead and work together. I want you to go ahead and do this for the next 30 or so minutes. And when there's 10 minutes left in the session, I want you to come back to the video. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video now, get in 30 minutes of work time. Okay. All right, guys, you're back. Let's go ahead and kind of debrief this work time. I want you to go ahead and actually take out the lesson plan for Tuesday that you just drafted. And I want you to read through the ISAT lesson plan and compare it to the lesson plan that you made. Okay? And these are the 3 questions I want you to go ahead and take a look at. Go ahead and take about 10 minutes to do that. CMAs, can you go ahead and pause the video here and put about 10 minutes on the clock? Okay, you guys are back, and so wanted to just review some best practices here. Once again, step 1, break down that objective, analyze that objective. Step 2, make that lesson assessment. Step 3, make that exemplar response. And then step 4, use that response to draft your key points. Okay? All right, and then I want you guys to finish up with one of my favorite munchkins. So this is Leslie. I taught her about 2 years ago. This is Leslie at her quinceañera. This is after she passed her STAR exam. I know that I would not have been able to give Leslie the education that she needed in history if I did not spend time, purposeful time, making dynamic lessons for her. And that started with, once again, me understanding my objective, creating that lesson assessment, creating that exemplar response, and drafting key points that would help Leslie master the assessment. And so hopefully, like, you're taking everything you learned in this session and you're going to start applying it today, because you're going to get some kids of your own on Monday, and I'm really excited about that. See you guys again soon.